Hello and welcome to this round 2 of Grand Prix Stockholm. We just saw the list on camera. It's Elves versus 8-Rack here. Each of these players currently 1-0 going into this second round, as one might expect. This Elves deck, it is going to get a lot of creatures in play, and it seems kind of appropriate that it kicks things off with the one that started it all, Lamoir Elves.
Yeah, you might think that Hugo here won the die roll, but it might not be true, actually. Aki might have decided to put his opponent on the play because he is playing this discard-heavy deck. Also a mulligan from the Elves player, it seems.
Mulligans can be really costly against the likes of 8-Rack. 8-Rack, a deck that can very aggressively attack cards in hand here. But Hugo has 2 copies of Collected Company, so assuming that he can make it through to his turn 3 with both that Lamoir Elves in play and at least 1 Collected Company in hand, he could bounce back from this.
Yeah, that's going to be huge. And what Aki really needs here is a smallpox. That would be tremendous to deny a lot of resources.
So Raven's Crime here, 1 black mana, make a card get discarded, and a Collected Company gets discarded here. This could be dangerous because if Thoughtseize follows it up, then it might be that Aki is very much in good shape here. But with Retrace, that Raven's Crime, anytime that Aki wants, he can discard a land from his hand to be able to cast it again from his graveyard. And that's exactly what he does. And this time I would anticipate probably the Forest going, because at least it means that Hugo has a chance at getting a Collected Company.
Of course, yeah.
So 8-Rack, what it's looking to do, get all of those cards out of the opponent's hand as quickly as possible, because ultimately the way it deals a lot of its damage is either with the Rack, another card from Alpha. A lot of cards from Alpha are very relevant in this matchup, as it turns out. Or Shrieking Affliction that does essentially the same thing, dealing damage to an opponent once they have low number of cards in hand. So the Rack, if there are no cards in hand, it'll be dealing 3 points of damage to Hugo each and every one of his turns.
Yeah. I'm actually a huge fan of the 8-Rack deck. I played it myself for a while. I don't think it's a tier 1 deck. I'm not pretending that it is, but it's actually a lot of fun, and I think it teaches you quite a bit about how Magic works and what you can do with your resources, how you suddenly go from this. It's almost like a value engine, although it's kind of weird because it's all 1-for-1 trades, and then once you have that value, you get into this race mode with your Shrieking Afflictions and the Racks, and it's really quite a fascinating deck in the modern spectrum.
Yeah, I think that there's a few decks that people, even if they don't end up fixing on them as being a main deck that they play for a long time, end up being useful ones from a developmental standpoint. I think that everyone that plays Modern should have a crack at playing Burn, because it's not quite as straightforward again as it first seems. Even though it's got a plan that you can sum up in a sentence, actually the details of the operations on it can be a little bit more tricky. As things stand here, though, Aki Vaino, he's kind of done a lot of what he needs to do, in as much as Hugo has no cards in hand, there is the Rack in play, but Hugo does have these creatures already on the battlefield. That means that he's got mana, he's got threats. Anything that he draws will be live for the entirety of this game, and one of the truisms of playing against discard is you can't discard the top card of their deck.
Yep. At the same time, the beautiful thing about the Rack and Shrieking Affliction is if your opponent draws powerful cards, then they have to empty their hands again, so they take more damage. These Mutavaults, by the way, will have a huge impact on this game 1. You can already see how they are punishing Hugo for attacking here.
Yeah, and Hugo does have to attack, and ends up having to throw away a Heritage Druid, replacing it with Lamoir Elves there on the follow-up. And yeah, the clock that's being represented by what Hugo has going on, much slower than what Aki's presenting, especially now that he has a second copy of the Rack. These effects do stack up, so that's 6 damage coming through from those artifacts each and every turn, and difficult damage to stop.
And now if Hugo doesn't keep his card in hand, he is just on a... Well, he has to keep... He can play this card, then he would go to 5, and then he could keep the next card in hand, but then he's just dead to another Retrace of the... what is it called? The discard spell.
Raven's Crime.
Raven's Crime, yes.
Yeah, Retrace an interesting ability. Some of you guys, if you play Commander, might know it from seeing Worm Harvest cast from the graveyard again and again and again. Elvish Visionary was a nice pickup there. An extra threat that you can get down that also represents a card in hand, forcing a Raven's Crime or similar on the other side of things. 2 Mutavaults. Nettle Sentinel doesn't mind getting in a fight with a Mutavault, it would seem. However, cast down is enough to deal with that creature, and yeah, Hugo in good shape here.
Yeah, I'm actually not a huge fan of cast down in the main deck because it doesn't support the main strategy of the 8-rack deck, but it looks like Aki is doing just fine here.
Yeah, I feel like I would rather have a Collective Brutality or something in that spot, though it may well be that he has them as well.
Look at that. Beautiful.
Aggressive attacks here. The 2 Mutavaults coming in. Hugo's life total tumbling here in the face of these racks. Now, Aki is effectively offering a trade here if Hugo wants to put 2 elves in front of a Mutavault.
And Hugo has to, yeah. Otherwise, he's just dead to the Rex. But even now, he's taking 4 plus 2, even if he doesn't play any more cards. But if he doesn't play any more cards, he's dying to the Mutavault on board. So it's really this kind of spot where he's effectively out of options, out of a path to victory.
And I guess that the rack in and of itself, this is a format where you see people playing Ensnaring Bridge anyway. This is a format where you see decks that empty their hands naturally anyway. You don't always need a lot of discard to get people down to 0 cards.
No. Would be interesting to see this, the 8-rack deck against the new blue-white control decks, because I think those with the, once they land a Jace or a Teferi, you're really out of luck.
Well, the luck with Aki Vaino here in Game 1 against Hugo Palm, able to pick up the win. And these players, they'll go to their sideboards here. And one of the most difficult things about Modern that I think can sometimes be a little bit of a frustration for especially pro players suddenly looking to get an edge in it, is the number of different decks to prepare for and how to build a sideboard that can reasonably compete with all of those different things going on. What do you think that these guys will have potentially brought they might be able to use here?
From the 8-rack perspective, I think you need collective brutality. This deals very cleanly with a lot of the elves. I mean, even the first Elf Lord, of course, there can't be too many on the battlefield, but then you're lost anyway. And you can use the escalate mode to take Collected Company out of the Elves player's hand. So you get a really, not a 2-for-1, but it feels like a 2-for-1 if you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that the way that things work with this 8-rack deck, we're talking about 1-for-1s, 2-for-1s. This is a deck that typically it spends a card to get rid of a card and then works on the assumption that sooner or later its rack is just going to do everything and get you there. Yeah,
and because Collected Company generates so much value, it's an important card to get rid of, so it's worth all the discard spells you invest into it. So from Hugo's perspective, I don't think he will have a dedicated sideboard plan against 8-rack. He might have some Reclamation Sages or something similar to deal with artifacts and enchantments, but because usually your hand gets emptied first, it's not actually that easy to deal with the win condition of the 8-rack deck. I think the best way to fight 8-rack is just to be faster, to deploy your hand and don't care about any kind of Rex or Shrieking Afflictions. Just try to go for the kill as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, one card that, if he has it in his deck, and we saw it in the list that we saw from the 5-0 list from online, it seems reasonable to think that he may well have, that could be useful from his main deck, is Lead the Stampede. There are not too many ways that the Elves deck gets ahead on this set of trades of 1-for-1 against discard, but Lead the Stampede can potentially draw you 3-4 cards for just a single card. Mm-hmm. Collected Company again gets you ahead on cards, and those seem to be the kind of the key hopes for Hugo if he doesn't just magically find a way of curving out naturally.
Yes, absolutely agree. Also, an interesting option would be to just put the 8-rack player on the play. That's an additional card you will have, and against a deck that's mostly interested in having these 1-for-1 trades, depleting both players' resources. I think it's a very viable option.
And it's interesting because, to me, like we were talking before we came on air about the value in rules of thumb, having little heuristics that mean that you can just sort of get to play a good game more frequently. So, for example, lots of people have the rule of thumb of mulligan any hand that has one or fewer lands. And that one's a pretty safe one. Also, the heuristic of if I win the dice roll, I'm going to go first. Typically speaking, I think that is a pretty solid plan for a large proportion of formats. Knowing these moments, though, to break with those rules, really important to potentially improving your win percentage.
And even here, it's not clear-cut because you do expose yourself to a brutal smallpox. If you go on the draw, you go Forest Land of Elves, and your opponent just drops the second swamp and smallpoxes you, you might have lost the game right there on the spot. It's an exchange that's not terrible for you. It's still a fair exchange, but it's backbreaking because it hinders your development or the development of what your deck is trying to do much more than it does the 8-rack player.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that the smallpox in 8-rack is one of the cards that can get you a little bit ahead on card advantage because typically speaking, you won't have a creature in play. Your opponent will if you're casting it much of the time. And if you're getting a creature plus all of the other things that are going on, you're very... I guess that's the card itself.
But it's still a 1-for-1, or a 2-for-2 or a 3-for-3. But it's not actually generating an advantage. Smallpox, I think, the highest variance card in the deck. Sometimes it's just utterly amazing. In other cases, you want any other card in your deck, but not Smallpox because you're playing against control or it's just not doing what you need it to do.
All right, so let's see who's going to be going first in this game too. It looks like Hugo's having a little think about it. Neither of these players have picked up their hand yet. It may be that Hugo has actually said, you know what, I need to just double check what I want to do here. Yeah,
interesting anecdote from one of the Team Unified Modern events that I played. It was loud in the room, and my opponent won the die roll, so I just assumed that they wanted to go first, and that's what I heard. In the end, it turned out they said that I should go first, which just got lost in the shuffle. So then...
Did you just both sit there staring at each other
exactly.
for a bit?
And then he said, well, go ahead. And I said, well, you won the die roll. You said you go first. And then we had this dispute where in the end, it was really tricky because I believed my opponent, but at the same time, I had made my decisions and my mulligan decision and everything based on the idea that I was that he was going first. That I was on the draw. So we actually got the head judge involved and we got a good conclusion to it. It was there was no hard feelings on either side, but it was an interesting spot nonetheless.
Yeah, really interesting.
Like, what do you do when there is just two players disagreeing about who said who wanted to go first, or what was said or what was understood?
As always, it feels to me like the majority of the more complicated issues when it comes to rulings in Magic come down to making sure the communication is really clear. If any of you are going to any tournaments, if you're just really clear about what you want to do at all times and that you can understand what your opponent's going to be doing, the likelihood that you'll have big rules issues diminishes pretty fast.
Yep. So in the end, just to clear this up, in the end, my opponent just told the judge privately that he had been putting people on the play every single game of this tournament, and that's a very easily verifiable thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was ruled that that was actually the case, but I was allowed to re-evaluate my mulligan decision.
Very cool. So here we see a Funeral Charm dealing with the first Land Royales that came from Hugo Palm. Hugo is on a mulligan. That's why we got to have our little extended chat there about the various merits of communication. First Land Royales down, second Land Royales comes back. There is a Lead the Stampede in hand, so if Hugo can just get up to the 3 mana that he needs, he will be able to improve his hand quite a bit here in spite of that mulligan. But there's nothing to say that he's going to get there. I mean, he needs to find more land, and Aki here, he's taking the maxim of Bolt the Bird very seriously, killing off those mana creatures so that Hugo can't get the boost on mana that the Elves deck would normally expect. So Shrieking Affliction coming down there. That is the kind of the new pseudo rack, the reason that we've got 8 racks rather than 4 in the name of this deck. And it's really what created this deck as a meaningful factor in Modern.
Absolutely. And here you can see a beautiful turn 3. Aki gets a Mutavault and a Liliana in play unopposed. And he can get rid of one of these Bontu's Last Reckonings. He has 2 in hand after already spending 2 of his cards as removal spells. And now something that's actually quite funny is because Hugo is not casting anything, he has naturally more cards in hand. So it will take longer for the 8-rack deck to secure a victory here. However, with an active Liliana and a Mutavault, that should not be too difficult.
Worth noting that there is Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth in play, meaning that if Aki wants to be able to cast his Smallpoxes, etc., he can do so even more easily. Here is a Smallpox.
Yeah, and I would expect Aki to get rid of the other Wrath in his hand so that he can just empty his hand.
He will, of course, also be losing a land.
Yeah. That should be Urborg. These lists are playing 3 to 4 Urborgs, which is not a problem usually because of Smallpox and Raven's Crime, but you really don't want to draw extra copies.
And then Liliana ticks up. At this point, Aki is hellbent. He's got no cards in hand. Hugo is whatever the battlefield equivalent of hellbent is. No permanents in play. And Hugo, he's not going to play this out. There's a Liliana on 5, a Mutavault already in play. It's not going to take too terribly long for Aki to empty Hugo's hand, and Hugo, without any mana to work with, simply extends his. And Aki picking up his second win relatively straightforwardly there.
This was super easy. The Elves player had a mulligan, removal spell, Liliana, Mutavault, and no lands to be found for the Elves player.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how you draw it up. 2-0 there for the 8-rack deck. Potentially see more of that over the course of the weekend. But we will see more Magic this round very soon. Do not go anywhere. More after these messages. Hello and welcome back, my friends, to the coverage of Grand Prix Stockholm. I'm Tim Willoughby. This is Simon Gertson, and we've already had our main match on camera here for the second round, but that does not mean to say we've not got a little bit more magic for you. Let's head back down to our feature match area for Bjorn Andersen against Lasse Norgard. So I can see that Lasse here, already listed on our graphic, is playing Titan Shift, but with the Wooded Foothills on the other side of things, in principle, there could be a mirror match on our hands here.
In principle, yes, it could actually be a lot of things. Wooded Foothills is a popular land. What it actually is a Temur moon deck. So Temur colored, Blood Moon, Tarmogoyf, Young Pyromancer, a little bit all over the place. I see Huntmaster of the Fells in the main deck. Yeah, a little bit of Temur value plus Blood Moons.
I mean, the surprise Blood Moon is in itself kind of an archetype when it comes to Modern. There are a lot of decks that have found ways of making Blood Moon work for them, and when it's powerful, it is game-ending.
Yeah, so that's, I guess, why you play two, so that you sometimes have this I win play on turn 3, and then in other scenarios, in other spots, you don't want to draw multiple if it's not backbreaking.
Now, one of the skills in Modern is trying to figure out what your opponent is on early. And if you're on Lasse Norgard's side of the table, right now you've seen a deck that's definitely not just monocolored. You've seen an opt, so at this point it could be maybe Storm?
Storm doesn't play Wooded Foothills, no.
But I mean, it could reasonably, because
yeah,
it's probably only ever fetching.
It could in theory, but why would you play a fetch land that doesn't get an island? I think Lasse knows that he's up against something spicy now.
And now maybe Scape Shift?
No, well, maybe the Scape Shift. That's actually not a bad guess. Yeah, the Temur colored Scape Shift decks, and now
he sees Tarmogoyf, and all bets are off. Now he knows that it's just a matter of, well, maybe the best I can do is enact my plan really well until I have more information.
But now the alarm bells should be going off for Lasse Norgard, because the opponent fetched 2 basics and has shown a Wooded Foothills, which should make you believe that there are mountains in Bjorn's deck. So for me, this is signaling Blood Moon quite clearly.
And of course, the cool thing for Lasse in this case is a large proportion of what his deck is doing involves just putting a lot of basics into play. He's got those Search for Tomorrows which can fetch up basics. It may mean that if he's looking to do cool things with Valak at the Molten Pinnacle that he's a little behind, but he can still just deploy his Primeval Titans and so on, and they will be bigger than Tarmogoyf.
Primeval Titan will be the biggest creature on the battlefield. 4 Primeval Titans and 2 Summoners Pact means he has ways to find those, but if his Valakut is turned off, that's actually huge.
And right now, the searching that he's done thus far, he's got himself with only 1 green source in the face of Blood Moon, though I guess with Search for Tomorrow still suspended, that not too big a worry. Wood Elves can fetch non-basic forests, one of the exciting things that it is able to achieve. All right, Tarmogoyf there conveniently with that die in play. We can see that it is a 3/4 coming in, 3 card types currently in the graveyard. Land, instant, and sorcery. And Tarmogoyf, for how powerful a card it is, it's been a little bit without a home lately in Modern.
Yep, you can still play Jund, Abzan, the classical Tarmogoyf decks, but they are just not that well positioned right now. Did Bjorn just pass the turn and miss his land drop?
I believe so, yeah. This could be a bit of a problem here. Obviously, it's difficult to tell what the turn count is based on looking at the board anyway against Titan Shift because it gets so many additional lands into play, but I believe that Bjorn has missed a land drop here.
I was sure he had more lands because he had the opt and he had so many cards in hand. That's really unfortunate because slamming Blood Moon there would have been absolutely key.
And a Stomping Ground here, the first trigger for Valak at the Molten Pinnacle. Sometimes it's not all about casting Scape Shift. Sometimes you can do things the old-fashioned way and just do 3 points of damage at a time with that Valak at the Molten Pinnacle. Farseek here fetching up another mountain in the form of Stomping Ground.
So Lasse is still on only a single green, right? He is also playing this quite risky, but Bjorn not fortunate here at all.
Yeah, having to use Opt just to try and find land. Lightning Bolt on top, uncastable, sticks that one to the bottom. We do have a third land, finally. Tamagoi fighting the good fight here, getting in for 3, but I think that Bjorn could find himself in a lot of trouble here. Just there are a lot of draws that Lasse Norgard can have here that don't actually end the game, but virtually end the game at this point.
Yeah, Bjorn has to sweat Scapeshift and Primeval Titan, Summoner's Pact as well. This is Scapeshift.
This is the reprint of Scapeshift, came back along in Core Set 2019, so another way of picking up the cards needed to put this deck together. And Lasse here, he's seen blue spells. In principle, he needs to think about counter magic, and it looks like he's waiting on this Scapeshift here.
It is Scapeshift, right?
I believe so.
Huh.
And I guess that the other thing that Lasse might be looking to do here is just garner a little bit more information about what Bjorn has going on. If you're playing against a deck that doesn't seem to fit within the regular template, just knowing a little bit more going into sideboarding might be worth giving up a small amount of win percentage in a game that you've almost certainly won.
Well, he will know what Bjorn has, and I'm not so certain anymore about this victory, because 7 points of life with your Valakuts turned off is tricky.
Yeah, specifically Blood Moon is exactly the card that gets Bjorn Anderson back in this game.
Oh.
Double Lightning Bolt, though. It all works out for Lasse Norgard, and it means that now, if there was any doubt, he gets to go into this game too, knowing that Blood Moon is a factor. The most he could have done until that point in Game 1 was suspect it, but he starts off with a hand that he already has a Scapeshift, he already has a Valakut. It looks like he doesn't have quite as much super early interaction as sometimes we see from these Titan Shift decks, but the end game is there.
You can expect Nature's Claim after sideboarding to deal with Blood Moon. Maybe a Reclamation Sage as well. And that means Blood Moon itself will not be enough to win this matchup.
Valak at the Molten Pinnacle, getting it down on turn 1. It's a tap land. You want to get it in play at some point, though. To be honest, a lot of the time you're fetching it with either Primeval Titan or Scapeshift.
I have to say, apart from the two Blood Moons in Bjorn's list, I don't see a lot of things that are super scary for the Scapeshift player. 2 mana leaks, 2 Spell Snare. That's the amount of non-cryptic command interaction we're looking at.
And Spell Snare, the things that it can stop in a Titan Shift list are Farseek. I mean, we're not talking about the cards that are the reason that Lasse Norgard chose to sleeve up this deck this morning.
Exactly, it's a speed bump at best.
But Bjorn Anderson fetched Steam Vents to kick things off here, so it may be that he's on a very slightly different plan for Game 2 than he was using Game 1. Yeah, really intrigued by this list that Bjorn has brought along. I mean, one of the cool things about Modern is that everyone can go on their own little paths, figuring out what they want to be doing with the format. There's a lot of powerful cards and a lot of good options. Lasse here, with that Windswept Teeth, he's not going to be too badly hurt by this Blood Moon, gets to fetch up a forest in response to it.
He will have to deal with it eventually. But this is what his sideboard is made for.
And there's that Nature's Claim that we talked about. Immediately dealing with Blood Moon, so if it's a speed bump, it's one that's so shallow that I'm not even sure that Lasse slowed down. That one's not going to hurt his suspension one little bit. Plays a Cinderglade here. That one counts as both a mountain and a forest. Counting as a mountain, obviously very important for Valakut. And here's a Farseek, which will fetch probably something very similar.
No, Lasse is just developing his mana now. No pressure from the Timor Moon deck. So far, there's no second Blood Moon to be seen.
Now, it does look like Bjorn has Cryptic Command in hand, and Cryptic Command might seem like a bit of a stretch on the old mana base, but it's amazing how these decks are able to assemble triple blue in addition to assorted other colours. Tireless Tracker coming down here first, and Tireless Tracker on turn 4, a play that we've seen for just about as long as Tireless Tracker has been available to play in Magic. On turn 4, where you cast it and then immediately play a land, get that clue token, means that it's hard not to get value off your tracker.
Yeah, and I really like this. Now Bjorn maybe can play a game where he has a tracker and sits on his Cryptic Command. With the tracker on the other side of the table, though, it's a bit more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, this Tireless Tracker, it seems likely will get more clues more quickly. Lots of fetch lands, lots of ways of getting more lands into play for the Titan Shift list.
Tireless Tracker is not a modern staple or a modern powerhouse, but in the matchups where he's good, he's really good.
Yeah, I mean, this is a card that represents card advantage in a color that typically doesn't have so much access to it.
Yeah, and it's more, right? It's because otherwise you would be playing harmonizes. That's not the point. You get a threat that's growing. You can play kind of a tempo game suddenly. You pressure planeswalkers. All these things in a single 3-mana card is quite the package.
Clues all around here.
I want to call it the Green Mage's Vendilion Click, because it's kind of the same matchups where you want to have it.
It gives you see that.
It gives you this different angle on your game plan that you just don't have otherwise.
So for now, Tireless Tracker getting in for just 3, the one on the other side of the battlefield being dealt with by Lightning Bolt. Bjorn with 3 clues in play, and at some point the Tireless Tracker growing as it successfully searches using those clues will be relevant.
Yeah, and Bjorn is of course representing Cryptic Command here, quite obviously, and he should wait for the real threat before countering anything, and he should be happy just sitting on these clues.
Yeah, Wood Elves, not overly scary. Yes, it gets to fetch another Cinderglade, which does mean that the mountain count in play now is 4. Not that long for Valakut the Molten Pinnacle to do its thing. And another copy of Wood Elves here. So Lasse Norgard doing a good job of getting a lot of lands into play. Wood Elves are very powerful coming to play ability.
And we are getting close to natural Valakut triggers again.
Yeah, sometimes this Titan Shift list, it's not about Titans, it's not about shifting, it's just about doing things the old-fashioned way.
Oh, and 2 Valakuts are actually quite scary for that Tireless Tracker.
Now, Bjorn being on 21, it means that he requires Lasse to have 1 more land in play for a classic Scapeshift win. But the main thing here is just going to be hoping that he can stop that the old-fashioned way with counter magic. Now, I guess that the interesting thing about having a plan that revolves around relying on counter magic against a Titan Shift list is that if Lasse does just start playing mountains and dealing 6 by playing a mountain on progressive turns, he can get around any counter magic plan without ever having to cast another spell this game.
Exactly. I think if Lasse gets to shoot the Tireless Tracker with his next land drop, then Bjorn is in big trouble. Also, he might have forgotten his clue trigger there with a fetch land.
Potentially. First Wood Elves jumping under the bus. There's now a number of buses over in the parking lot on the other side of things for Bjorn Anderson. He does have a very big Tarmogoyf in play.
Lasse doesn't have a mountain, though, which is rare for the Titan Shift deck.
Yeah, the only way that he has of getting one, by the looks of things there, is a Scapeshift, which I would be pretty confident is not going to resolve here.
No, but he might be confident enough to go for Summoner's Pact, Primeval Titan, have it get countered, and then threaten the Scapeshift the turn after.
Yeah, a lot of big threats in this Titan Shift list. It's able to bait out counter magic comparatively well.
You can also bait it with the Thragtusk actually. Bjorn should let the Thragtusk resolve from a strategic perspective, but it's still difficult. Such a great value card.
So Lasse here, it seems like he's really weighing up his options.
It looks like he wants to cast Scapeshift here.
Now, I guess there's a small amount of value in doing all of that pump faking, tapping different numbers of land, untapping them, really giving Bjorn something to think about before actually pulling the trigger on whatever spell it's going to be for the turn.
This is actually nice now. He decided to crack the clue instead and found the mountain he was looking for in form of Wood Elves. And this forces a response by Bjorn Anderson. So you can see how much pressure this double Valakut is actually putting on him.
Yeah, lovely position to be in where your Cryptic Command is countering a Wood Elves rather than what would normally be considered to be an actual business spell.
Oh, and he went for counter draw. He could have tried to delay Lasse's game plan a little bit with bouncing maybe a Valakut. Or even a mountain, as crazy as it sounds.
Yeah, bouncing a mountain would at least mean that the natural Valakut plan was a little slower.
Oh, no, but Lasse still had his land drop left, so actually that wouldn't have made sense. So Bjorn is hanging on. Lasse drew the Cryptic Command, though. That was the most important result for this turn for him.
A lot of clues in play here. These attacks coming from Bjorn Anderson, it's not going to take too long for them to close this game out. Three Wood Elves now in the graveyard there for Norgard. A pretty big grip still in Bjorn Anderson's hand here.
He needs a hard counter. He needs a hard counter for Scapeshift. Mana Leak doesn't do it.
5 mana here, though. It looks like Lasse Norgard playing it a little bit cagey. Of course, he doesn't know the exact makeup of Bjorn Anderson's list. So goes for a Thragtusk here.
And he figures if Thragtusk resolves that he's fine. He also has a land in hand, which is a mountain. So this is actually very well played.
So Snapcaster Mage on Cryptic Command. Cryptic Command is getting used here.
Counter draw as before, and now Lasse shows what he has been planning all along.
Now, from your perspective here, does it look like using a Cryptic Command on Thragtusk was maybe being a little bit aggressive with that counter magic?
No, I think Bjorn had to go for the win next turn. And the Thragtusk plus a mountain would have meant that he is just not winning on board anymore. So I think he gave himself the best shot at winning against most hands that Lasse could have had.
Now, of course, in this exact instance, there is the Scapeshift. And Bjorn here, he is asking for Lasse to kind of show him that he's doing it. And the reason for that, presumably, is you don't know how many mountains there are on the deck.
Yep. However, with the new version of Scapeshift, this is not an issue anymore. You have so many dual lands that count as mountains. It's really almost impossible not to have the kill.
Yeah, being straightforward red-green, not so much pressure maybe on the way that your mana base is put together. But we are going to get a chance to have a look at one third and final match here from our feature match area, heading back down once again to see Humans in the hands of Christoph Autenthaler against Jesse Latvala is on blue-white Tron. This an unusual iteration of Tron that is kind of a story from a bygone era almost, really. Typically, these days, we see our Tron lists largely being mono-green, leaning on the power of ancient stirrings in order to find the things that they need. But the blue-white list, it gets to do some cool things with the likes of Mindslaver and Academy Ruins on occasion. It gets to run some honest-to-goodness counter-magic, and I'm really interested to see how it's going to end up playing out against Christoph Alcantala's humans, as we see Condescend as the first counterspell that sets up draw steps, dealing with the first champion of the parish on the other side of things.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is just mono blue Tron, or maybe there's a white card there in there somewhere, but basically there are only two Tron decks. Mono green Tron, which is, I would say 95% of all Tron decks are mono green Tron these days, and then you have mono blue Tron that might have some artifacts that also produce white mana.
A little awkward here. The two of the first 3 land drops for the blue-white Tron list are not Tron pieces. Though I guess that one thing about the blue-white Tron list is it's not always being quite as aggro about hitting Tron on turn 3.
Yep. Actually, you have a lot lower percentage of having those nut draws if you don't have Ancient Stirring, Sylvan Scrying, and the 8 stars to fix your mana while deploying Tron lands.
Now, as things stand, Christoph here, he's had a pretty good start. That Ether Vial early on will mean that the counter magic available to Jesse will not be quite as potent. There'll be at least one human per turn that Christoph can get down each and every turn. Already a champion of the parish that has the potential to be quite a big threat here as well.
It's funny how Christoph has the Ether Vial, but is still casting his creatures on curve as well.
Yeah, I mean, if he had Cavern of Souls as well in this mix, then I would say it would just be a bit of a disaster for Jesse. As things stand, Ancient Ziggurat alongside that, the other one there from Ixalan, Unclaimed Territory, meaning that mana very good for Christoph Alcantala, but his creatures are still a little bit counterable.
And Jesse is getting very close to Tron.
Now, in terms of payoff cards for the blue-white Tron list, how different is it from your green lists these days?
Not very different. You're playing a bit fewer cards of that nature because you need more interactive cards, but you still have the Ulamog, you have the Wormcall Engines, the Karns, the Ugins. A nice little touch is, of course, the one Mindslaver that you just need to put people in the absolute lock with Academy Ruins.
And we can see here Solemn Simulacrum coming down for Jesse Ladvala, fetching up another basic. I guess, yeah, this list, one way or another, it's accelerating, but in this instance, accelerating even without Tron.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. It gets you a basic. I remember the times when Solemn Simulacrum was one of the best constructed cards you could play. These days are over, but it's still a powerful card.
Yeah, still one that you see being played in a large proportion of commander decks. Creatures with good coming into play, leaving play abilities, very potent there. Ether Vial getting ticked up to 3 here, and that just as well, because there are a lot of good 3-drops in Christoph Alcantala's hand here.
Oh, I think this is the turn where the humans deck will explode with Mantis Rider, Phantasmal Image, copy my Mantis Rider, put 2 counters each on my Champion of the Parishes that are already in play, and you take approximately 9 damage or something like that.
I mean, if it's 2 Mantis Riders, then it's, 12 damage? 13 damage?
Well, yeah, I was assuming that the Solemn Simulacrum jumps in the way of the biggest creature.
Yeah, the sad robot is known for doing that sort of thing. Originally, of course, the invitational card designed by Jens Thuron. A lot of invitational cards seeing a fair amount of play in Modern. Of course, the humans list playing Chris Pecula's invitational card in the form of Meddling Mage. We see Dark Confidants showing up from time to time also.
Yeah, no Sylvan Safekeepers, though.
No,
sometimes in Legacy.
Olarada was stood at one of the trader stands with a copy of Sylvan Safekeeper in front of him yesterday. It occasionally sees a little bit of play, and when it's good, it's very good indeed.
So the reason why Christoph had to think quite a bit about this turn is, of course, because of the threat of something devastating like Ugin coming down, and you have to understand as the humans player, when do I have to hold back resources to go for a second strike, and when is it correct to go all in. This is actually exactly the turn that we described 1 minute ago, but it wasn't the only option available to Aukenthaler.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we talk sometimes about the notion of overextending, and any more following this, I think, would constitute an overextension for Christoph here. It turns out that Ugin is in hand here for Jesse Ladvala. Let's see whether or not he has the necessary mana to be able to cast the Spirit Dragon this turn.
This was very classical card gaming here, because in the end you also have to evaluate what is the danger that my opponent has, the third Tron piece, plus something that devastates me, and if they have it, is it actually good for me if I don't play that Phantasmal Image so that I deal that damage the turn after instead of now, and so on and so on. So very, very intricate decision that relies on a lot of imperfect information.
And Jesse Ladvala here, sadly for him, he casts Thought Not Seer and does get rid of Reflect Mage, sees another copy of Mantis Rider though, and I believe that these Mantis Riders, barring something very impressive for that 1 blue mana available to Jesse, will be enough to make sure that this is a relatively straightforward Game 1 win for the humans. Go team, we've done it again.
Are you on the side of the humans?
I am one of the humans, yes.
I'm on the side of the sad robot.
All right, so here we have Game 2 kicking off here. Jesse Ladvala has his turn 1 as mine. Horizon Canopy into Noble Hierarch on the other side of things. Horizon Canopy, like one of those cards that's kind of a necessary evil, I think, sometimes for these decks, because it does represent, on occasion, quite a bit of damage, but being able to cash it in for a land in the future, for another card, sorry, in the future, one of the few ways that the humans deck has of getting up on cards in the late game if it needs to.
I wouldn't even call it necessary evil, because there are other green-white duels you could play, right? You are actually happy to have those 2 or 3 effects in certain games, in certain matchups, where you get to draw an additional card. Flooding out with the humans deck is a real issue, and especially if your early threats get dealt with.
So Talisman of Progress came down early for Jesse Ladvala, and that was dealt with by a Reclamation Sage. Christoph, he wasn't going to hang about when it came to dealing with an artifact. They're all acceleration one way or another, and this way round. He also got to cut Jesse off the white mana that Talisman of Progress represents. How relevant that white mana is, we're not quite sure, but you know what? It also means that there's Reclamation in Sage in play now, which is successfully attacking for 3. Now, the other land next to Academy Ruins that you see in play for Latvala there is Aboro Palace in the Clouds. This is functionally an island most of the time, but also you can bounce it. I mean, there's a weird tension when it comes to cards like Aboro that it works like an island that gets hit by Blood Moon, but doesn't get hit by Choke. So maybe you want to run it. It gets complicated.
Yeah, and against 8-rack, you might actually want to return it to your hand to take less damage.
All sorts of options available. 2 copies of Horizon Canopy in play here. Christoph Altenthaler, his low tail might tumble at a similar sort of rate to his opponents here. He's already got Champion of the Parish in play, and he's figuring out what else he wants to stick onto the battlefield.
Yeah, I don't think he minds in this particular matchup to take a few points of extra damage.
All right, so we've been talking about invitational cards. Here is Meddling Mage. If it resolves, once it comes into play, Christoph Altenthaler gets to name a card, and then that card can't get played while Meddling Mage is in play.
Yeah, quite an interesting decision here what to name. Let's see if we can spot the decision. No.
I mean, given that there's 2/3 of Tron being represented, what with that Expedition map, thinking of one of the big expensive Planeswalkers is certainly interesting.
I think Ugin is the scariest card for humans, because if Ugin comes down and -2s or -3s, it's very, very hard to come back from. On the other hand, you know that there are never 4 Ugins in in this kind of list. So it's not clear. It's not clearly the pick.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing that if you were dealing against Mono Green Tron, it would be a little bit easier to second guess and say, well, there's 4 Karns, there's 2 Ugins, maybe Karn, even though it's slightly weaker, is a percentage play.
Yeah, or Oblivion Stone.
Yes.
If you're playing against the green versions, you know that there are 4 Oblivion Stones in the deck, which are not usually part of the Mono Blue Tron decks because they want to play these talismans and signets and so on.
As things stand here, we've seen a few matchups in these early rounds where players have had to roll with the punches a little bit and figure out what their opponent's on the fly. But you know what? Thus far, we've largely seen the more established deck be the victor in those scenarios. Essentially, the raw power of some of the better-known decks in the format being able to overcome the uncertainty of an unknown opponent. Or a less-known opponent, should we say. Looks like Jesse there just fixing an issue that's going on with a sleeve on one of the cards in his deck as he goes through. One cool thing, I guess, when it comes to Academy Ruins, over and above the big game that it can do with Mindslaver, it can also do a small game with the likes of Expedition Map, just if you really, really want to make sure that you're going to hit your Tron eventually.
Yep. Academy Ruins is a powerful card.
And then we see exactly that. Does put the Expedition Map on top. So essentially a concession to not doing very much on that turn, but guaranteeing that the following turn he's going to be in good shape to virtually guaranteeing that in the next turn or so he's going to get that Tron altogether.
Absolutely, and effectively with 9 mana, 2 of those tapped from the activation of Expedition Map, but that's 7 mana that he can use for something that will not be Ugin, but could be Karn or Wormcall Engine. Wormcall Engine not very good against a deck with Reflector Mages, though.
So Reclamation Sage here, the one creature not being pumped by Thalia's Lieutenant, but plenty of other humans in play already, and this is going to be a big set of swings coming through here for Christoph Altenthaler. Exalted no longer the most exciting thing to be thinking about when it comes to attacks. Instead, we have, well, let's take a look. 2, 8, that is 12 damage coming through here. Jesse Latvala in virtual check. He has to deal with this board this turn, otherwise it's lights out, and Christoph Altenthaler will be off to talk to his friends, let them know how his round went, which is to say he won relatively straightforwardly.
Yep, no Tron, but also no Haymakers, I think, for Latvala here. Even for Mono Green Tron, it's difficult to get out of this kind of spot when you only have 7 mana. Only.
Yeah, I mean, Karn right now really doesn't achieve a whole lot at all. 1 mana off being able to cast Ugin.
Wormcoil Engine, I don't think cuts it, even if you go to 11 blocking the biggest creature. No, you're still dying.
Dimir Signet coming down here. Bit of a mix in terms of the mana rocks being used by Jesse Latvala. Does go with the Wormcoil Engine.
Let's see. Block the champion, go up to 11, take 4, 8, 9, 12. That's dead on board.
When you try your best but you don't succeed, when you get what you want but not what you need.
Try again. Next match.
Pretty much. All right, so Christoph Altenthaler here. He's just doing the math. He's making sure, which I respect. But with Jesse Latvala conveniently entirely tapped out, the number of cards that he realistically needs to think and play around descends rapidly. All right, some big swings coming through. Let's make sure that all of our math is in line here. 2, 4, 8, 11, 12. That should be it. And there's the handshake. Christoph Altenthaler The humans, my people, they have successfully made it through round 2. This is, of course, not a single elimination tournament. There's plenty of time left in this. Even for Jesse, who's started off, he's at 1-1 after the first couple of rounds. He can rattle off a whole bunch of wins in order to make day 2 of this GP. All you need to do is make sure that you get to an X or 2 or better record, and that is enough to make it through to Sunday's play. Ultimately, in terms of making top 8, the more wins, the better, really. Once you pick up that third, certainly that fourth loss, the likes of actually making it through to top 8 gets a little bit dicier. But this early stage in the day, this is the point where various of the pros that have shown up, they're still on buys. They haven't even started playing their tournament yet. Rounds 1 to 3, it's all about just getting through, trying to get that ideal record, and then holding on to the unbroken win streak for as long as you can, because for almost everyone in almost every circumstance, an unbroken win streak is just not going to work out.
To be fair, the 3-buy players is really the elite class of players at this event. There are a lot of great players at the European circuit that have 2 buys from Planeswalker points and the amount of GPs that they play. But we are looking at Hall of Fame level players, gold level players, platinum pros that are here, maybe to fight for Player of the Year.
I'm glad you brought it up, because this is something that's going to be, for you guys at home, a bit of a recurring theme for most of this weekend, I would imagine, depending on the records and so on and so forth. The Player of the Year is not yet decided. Seth Manfield currently does lead the Player of the Year race, and he's got enough of a lead that if nothing changes this weekend, he will be the Player of the Year. And he's elected to stay in the US this weekend. The World Championship is next weekend in Las Vegas, and that seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to focus on, given that you're already in the league.
Very reasonable.
That being the case, there are a couple of people with an expectation to potentially be able to do cool things at Worlds and indeed lock up Player of the Year this very weekend. So Reed Duke and Luis Salvato, there you can see they are on 78 pro points. So there is a potential for these guys to get there. But there's an additional wrinkle in the terms of when it comes to earning pro points, you have to look at what your previous GP finishes are, what you can improve on. So for Luis Salvato, he's got a pro point finish of just a 1 point pro point finish to improve on from this GP.
His worst GP result that counts is a 1-pointer, so that would be the result he's looking to replace.
And that means I think if he makes the semi-finals or better of this GP, that could get him ahead of Seth.
If he makes the quarters, he's already tied with Seth for Player of the Year, and if he makes the semis, he is overtaking Seth.
Now for Reed, his worst GP finish of the season is a 2-point finish, meaning that he's got to do even better in this GP if he wants to make it to be the Player of the Year.
Yep, he actually needs just exactly 1 match win more for the same result. So we are looking at semifinals to tie Seth and finals to overtake Seth.
And of course, overtaking Seth for Reed means that not only would he become Player of the Year, he would also become the United States national champion. Seth already the North American champion in terms of invitation to Worlds, but in terms of going to the World Magic Cup and representing your country, Reed Duke still has the potential to take that honor.
Yeah, and if you look at this list, the World's invitation was not really in question for either of these players.
All of these guys, we will be seeing them in Las Vegas next week. I'm literally going to be getting back from Stockholm, repacking my bag and jumping on a plane to go across to Las Vegas to check out what that's going on. Both those players, we're going to be seeing them in the individual World Championship, but also in the team series, because Team Ultimate Guard, Team Haruya Latin, they will be battling, and they'll be battling with Guilds of Ravnica in the team series, which is going to be very exciting indeed. I'm literally going to be in the room watching these guys as they get a chance to see the Guilds of Ravnica complete set for the first time, get cards in their hand, and try and cobble together a plan to win that team series.
Yeah, that's going to be really exciting. I'm looking forward to Vegas. Quite interesting how if you're close to making Player of the Year, you're also in the team series finals, or the other way around. There seems to be some correlation.
Yeah, it turns out that if you win a lot, then there's a good chance that you'll see all sorts of rewards. And I mean, for someone like Reed, he's been at the very top of the game for a very long time. He's going to be eligible for Hall of Fame next year. Interestingly, he's not got like the big exclamation point on his resume of a Pro Tour win, a Player of the Year win, the kind of thing that makes him the slam dunk for Hall of Fame that I think that in many people's hearts and minds he's kind of there but doesn't have the obvious way of them justifying it. So for him, this weekend could be that moment.
Yep, hungry for trophies.
Very exciting stuff. We'll get a chance to see how Reed's doing soon enough, currently on his buys, but our next round, round 3, is not far away. Do not go anywhere. It'll be Riley and Raf in round 3 for you after these messages.